My name is Allison Carter, and I'm 32 years old. The moment I walked into the Christmas party, my brother crossed the room, slapped me across the face, and shouted, "How dare you show your face here? You weren't invited." I barely had time to steady myself before my father looked up from his drink and sneered, "Your place is in the kitchen, not with this family." Every conversation stopped. Dozens of guests stared at me as though I were the scandal instead of the woman being humiliated. My brother reached for my arm, clearly intending to drag me back out through the doors, but I didn't move. I hadn't driven 3 hours to beg for a seat at their table. I had come because of the sealed envelope hidden inside my coat, and because by midnight, everything they had built on lies could come crashing down. Then a chair scraped across the floor behind me. A tall man near the fireplace stood so abruptly that several guests instinctively stepped aside. "Back away from her!" he thundered. "Do you realize whose face you just struck?" My family turned pale. They recognized the governor, but they had no idea why he knew me, why he looked so furious, or why 2 state investigators were standing silently near the ballroom entrance. My brother's grip loosened. My father's glass trembled. I touched my burning cheek, looked directly at both of them, and realized they still believed I had come alone. They were wrong. Before I tell you what the governor said next, and what happened after I finally walked away, tell me, what time is it where you are right now? Where are you watching from? And what's the weather like there? I'm curious to see just how far this story travels. For 3 long seconds, no one moved. Then my brother let go of my arm as though my skin had burned him. "Governor Caldwell," my father said, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes. That was how everyone in the room finally learned the name of the man who had stood up for me. Henry Caldwell, the governor whose office controlled the future of the largest public contract my family's company had ever pursued. My father, Thomas Carter, had spent the entire year courting donors, hosting private dinners, and telling anyone who would listen that Carter Development was about to win the North Ridge Renewal Project. My brother, Ryan Carter, had already ordered champagne bottles engraved with the contract number. The Christmas party wasn't really a family celebration. It was a victory party for money they hadn't even received yet. "There must be some misunderstanding," Thomas continued. "My daughter has a habit of creating scenes." Henry's expression hardened. "The only scene I witnessed was your son striking a guest in front of 40 people. Ryan glanced around, suddenly realizing that every phone in the room could become evidence. "She trespassed," he said. "She's been cut off from this family for years." "Cut off?" I repeated quietly. My voice sounded far calmer than I actually felt. The envelope inside my coat pressed against my ribs like a second heartbeat. Henry stepped beside me, not in front of me, and that mattered. He wasn't there to rescue a helpless woman. He was there because I had spent the last 14 months doing exactly what my family had always mocked me for, following documents until the lies had nowhere left to hide. "Ms. Carter is not here as your dependent," Henry said. "She's here as the investigative journalist whose reporting led my office to suspend the Northridge contract award this morning." The room changed. Not dramatically, the way it happens in movies. No one screamed. Instead, smiles disappeared one by one. A contractor near the bar quietly set down his drink. A banker who had been laughing with Ryan suddenly glanced toward the exit. My father's face drained of color so quickly that I almost pitied him. Almost. Ryan stared at me. "You," he whispered. It was the first honest word he'd spoken all evening. For years, he had called my work a hobby, forwarded my articles to relatives with laughing emojis, and told people I survived by writing unpaid blog posts. He had no idea that my latest investigation had been published under a protected byline while the legal review was underway. He didn't know that I had interviewed former employees of Carter Development, traced payments through 3 shell companies, or uncovered invoices for materials that had never reached the construction sites. Most importantly, he had no idea who had sent me the very first ledger. Across the room, a woman in a silver dress met my eyes. Megan Sullivan had been my closest friend since college and, for the past 6 years, the compliance director at my father's company. She had slipped quietly into the party 10 minutes before I arrived. Until that moment, Ryan had assumed she was there to celebrate with him. "This is absurd," Thomas said. He turned toward Henry, lowering his voice as though authority could be negotiated in private. "Governor, you know how ambitious reporters work. They take ordinary accounting errors and turn them into criminal accusations. Allison has always resented this family." "Resentment doesn't create bank transfers," I said. "It doesn't forge inspection signatures. It doesn't bill the state for steel that was never purchased." Those words landed harder than any shout ever could. Ryan took a step toward me. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Then why did you delete the December audit folder at 2:14 this afternoon?" His mouth opened, but no words came out. Megan had watched the deletion happen through the company's mirrored compliance server. She had also preserved the original folder, the access logs, and the message in which Ryan instructed an employee to clean the Christmas list before the governor arrives. He had been referring to the list of fake vendors. That phrase had become the title of my final evidence package. Thomas's eyes flicked toward Megan for less than a second, but that single second told me everything. He knew someone inside the company had opened the door for me. "Allison," he said, changing tactics, softening his voice into the tone he always used whenever he wanted obedience to sound like concern. "Give me the envelope. We can discuss this privately, as a family." I remembered hearing that same voice when I was 23, when he demanded that I turn down a journalism fellowship because it embarrassed him to have a daughter chasing scandals. I had surrendered then. I wasn't surrendering now. "This stopped being private the moment you used public money," I said. Thomas moved faster than I expected, reaching for my coat. Before his hand could touch me, Henry stepped between us. "Don't make another mistake in front of witnesses," he said. Behind him, the 2 investigators at the entrance opened their jackets just enough to display their credentials. My father froze. Ryan glanced toward the doors, calculating whether he could leave without making himself look guilty. Then Megan raised her phone. "You should stay," she said. "The governor has only suspended the contract. Allison is about to explain why your company may not survive the night." I pulled the envelope from my coat but didn't open it. Not yet. For years, Thomas and Ryan had controlled every family conversation by deciding which facts were allowed to exist. If I mentioned the fellowship they had pressured me to reject, I was ungrateful. If I mentioned the job interview Ryan sabotaged by calling the editor and describing me as unstable, I was dramatic. If I asked why my late mother's inheritance had disappeared from the trust account, I was greedy. Their power had never come from being right. It came from speaking first, speaking louder, and forcing everyone else to defend themselves. That night, I refused to follow their script. "You told everyone I came because I wanted money," I said. "So, let's begin with money." I placed the envelope on the piano, opened my laptop, and connected it to the ballroom screen Ryan had planned to use for his contract announcement. The Carter Development logo disappeared. In its place appeared a single scanned document dated 8 years earlier. It was my mother's trust amendment. The room was so quiet I could hear the projector fan humming. "My mother left me 20% of the company," I said. "Not because she expected me to work for you, but because she wanted me to remain independent of you." Thomas's face went rigid. Ryan laughed too quickly. "That document was replaced." "That's what you told me." I clicked once. A second document appeared beside the first. It was the waiver supposedly signed by me 6 months after my mother died, transferring my shares to Ryan in exchange for a payment I never received. My signature looked convincing from a distance. Up close, the letters leaned in exactly the same way they did on an old college application stored in Thomas's office. A forensic document examiner compared them, I said. The signature was copied. The notary listed on the waiver had been dead for 9 weeks when she supposedly witnessed it. A murmur rippled through the guests. Ryan stopped smiling. My father's eyes never left the screen. This has nothing to do with the state contract, he said. It establishes a pattern, Henry replied. His voice was quieter now, which made the warning even sharper. False documents, concealed ownership, financial gain. Thomas looked at him in open disbelief. You're taking her side based on family paperwork? No, Henry said. The state is responding to evidence submitted through lawful channels. I'm standing beside her because you're attempting to intimidate the person who preserved that evidence. I clicked again. The screen changed to 3 columns labeled past, present, and payment. It was the structure I had used to keep myself sane throughout the investigation. Under past were the moments my family had dismissed as personal failures, the fellowship I lost, the newspaper job that disappeared after a mysterious phone call, the apartment deposit Thomas promised, then withdrew when I refused to move back home. Under present were company records, altered inspections, duplicate invoices, fake vendors, and private emails. Under payment were the names of shell companies receiving public funds. 2 were controlled by Ryan's college roommate. 1 was registered to Thomas's private accountant. The last had been created using my name. That was the part I hadn't told Henry when we first met. My family hadn't merely mocked my career. They had used my identity as a shield. Bennett Media Consulting, I said, reading the shell company's name aloud. It received $940,000 over 18 months. The tax identification number traces back to an application filed using a scanned copy of my passport. Ryan's confidence cracked. You gave us copies of your documents years ago. For the trust, I said, not for fraud. Watch your language, Thomas snapped. The old command echoed through the room, automatic and familiar. For a moment, my body remembered being 23, sitting at his dining table while he tore my fellowship letter in half, and told me that respectable daughters did not investigate powerful men. I had spent years wondering whether I had imagined the cruelty in that sentence. Then I found the email he had sent Ryan that very same night. Keep her close or keep her broke. The memory no longer made me feel small. It made the next click easy. His email filled the screen. No one needed me to explain it. Thomas stared at the words as though they had betrayed him simply by surviving. Ryan turned on him. You said those servers were wiped. There it was. The first crack between them. My father's head snapped toward him, and every guest in the room understood that Ryan had just admitted he knew about the destruction of evidence. I meant old family files, he said, but the correction came too late. Megan stepped forward. The servers were never wiped, she said. The company maintained mirrored backups to satisfy lender requirements. I preserved them after I discovered the compliance reports were being altered. Ryan's gaze shifted to her with undisguised fury. You did this? Megan didn't back down. I stopped it. He called her disloyal. Thomas called her confused. Both men talked over each other, trying to rebuild control through sheer noise. I watched them and finally understood something that had taken me years to learn. People who demand loyalty often mean silence, and people who call the truth betrayal are usually protecting the benefits they gained from the lie. I raised one hand, and Henry asked the room to remain quiet. Megan didn't contact me first, I said. She contacted an attorney. The attorney contacted the inspector general. I became involved because the shell company carried my name, and because I could document how the scheme began. Thomas's expression shifted from anger to calculation. Then this can still be contained, he said. We correct the filings, return the disputed funds, and settle the trust issue. Allison gets her shares. Everyone walks away. It was an extraordinary offer, if you ignored what it revealed. He had denied everything until denial became too expensive. I looked at the man who had taught me to confuse fear with respect and asked the first question that truly mattered. Would you be offering me justice if the governor weren't standing here? Thomas didn't answer. His silence was the answer. I picked up the envelope from the piano. This isn't a settlement proposal, I said. It's the publication notice your attorneys received this afternoon. My investigation goes live at midnight. Midnight was 47 minutes away. Ryan looked at the clock above the fireplace, then back at my laptop. I saw the exact moment he stopped thinking like a brother and started thinking like an executive trapped inside a collapsing deal. Turn it off, he ordered the technician standing near the screen. The technician reached for the cable, but one of the investigators shook his head. Do not interfere with potential evidence. Ryan's hand curled into a fist. He had struck me when he believed the room belonged to him. Now that the room was full of witnesses, he needed a different weapon. You all know what this is, he announced to the guests. Allison has hated us ever since she failed to make it on her own. She attached herself to the governor, fed him some dramatic story, and now she expects applause. Several people looked toward Henry. It was a calculated accusation. If Ryan could make my evidence look like the result of personal connections, he could turn corruption into gossip. Henry didn't defend his own reputation first. He defended the process. Ms. Carter and I met once, in the presence of legal counsel, after the Inspector General verified the initial records, he said. I did not direct her reporting. I did not provide her with documents. I was scheduled to attend tonight before I knew she would be here because your father invited me to celebrate a contract that had already been suspended. That final sentence drew uncomfortable looks from several donors. Thomas had used the governor's attendance as proof that the award was guaranteed. Some of the guests had invested based on that promise. When I asked whether Ms. Carter would be safe entering this property, Henry continued, I was assured this was a family gathering. Your behavior has answered that question. Ryan's jaw tightened. So that's what... Do you realize whose face you struck was supposed to mean? He asked. Is she some protected celebrity now? Henry met his gaze without blinking. It means you struck the journalist who uncovered an attempt to divert millions of dollars from schools, roads, and emergency housing. It means you assaulted a cooperating witness in front of state investigators. And it means the person you dismissed as a failure performed the due diligence your own board refused to perform. No one applauded. This wasn't that kind of victory. The truth did something even more satisfying. It rearranged the room. The people who had been clustered around Ryan earlier quietly stepped away. The banker near the bar pulled out his phone and began typing. Two subcontractors whispered urgently beside the windows. A board member named Robert Hayes removed the Carter Development lapel pin from his jacket and slipped it into his pocket. Thomas noticed every movement. Nobody leaves, he said. His voice cracked on the final word. Henry turned toward him. You don't control the exits. Thomas recovered quickly. He walked toward me with his palms open, the picture of a reasonable father. Allison, listen to me. Whatever happened with the trust was wrong. I can admit that. But if this article is published, hundreds of employees could lose their jobs. Families will suffer. Is that what you want on Christmas? There it was. The burden he had prepared for me. His decisions. My guilt. For years, he had turned the consequences of his actions into proof of my cruelty. I looked at the employees in the room, then at Megan. She gave me a slight nod. We had anticipated this. The article doesn't call for the company to be shut down, I said. It identifies the people who authorized the scheme and the board members who ignored repeated warnings. The Inspector General has recommended appointing an independent administrator so legitimate projects and payroll can continue. Robert Hayes stepped forward. The board wasn't informed about an administrator. The board was informed at 4 o'clock this afternoon, Megan said. The notice was sent to the official account. Ryan redirected the board's email to his private server at 4:12. Robert checked his phone. The shame on his face quickly hardened into anger. You told us the system was down. Ryan pointed at Megan. She's manipulating the records. Then you should welcome an independent forensic review, I said. He had no answer that didn't expose him. Thomas tried again, this time abandoning the caring tone altogether. You publish that story, and I'll make sure every editor in this country knows you exploited confidential family information. I'll sue you until you can't afford a place to sleep. That threat might once have worked. I had spent my first year as a reporter counting coins at grocery store checkout lines and pretending hunger was discipline. He had always used money to make every act of independence feel temporary. But my article had already survived review by 3 attorneys, 2 forensic accountants, and an editor who knew exactly who we were taking on. Your attorneys sent that threat 6 weeks ago, I said. They withdrew it after we provided the first evidence index. His eyes narrowed. He hadn't known. Ryan had concealed that failure from him, just as Thomas had concealed the mirrored server backups from Ryan. Their alliance was beginning to consume itself. Then Megan's phone chimed. She read the message, looked at Henry, and said, "The emergency board meeting has reached a quorum." Ryan laughed, but the sound was thin. At 11:15 on Christmas Eve? Your bylaws allow an emergency vote whenever officers expose the company to criminal liability, she replied. The ballroom screen split in 2. My evidence remained on one side. On the other, 6 board members appeared in a secure video conference. Robert joined them directly from the ballroom. Thomas stared at the faces on the screen as though they were trespassers inside his own home. The board chair spoke first. Pending the forensic investigation, Thomas Carter is suspended as Chief Executive Officer, and Ryan Carter is suspended as Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately. Ryan lunged toward the laptop. One of the investigators stepped in front of him, not violently, simply blocking his path. Do not touch it. The board chair continued. Company accounts requiring either man's authorization have been frozen. Building access has been revoked. Corporate counsel has been instructed to preserve all records and cooperate fully with the authorities. Thomas looked at me. For the first time that night, he didn't look angry. He looked afraid. What have you done? He whispered. I documented what you did, I answered. The board made its own decision. The front doors opened behind us. 4 more investigators entered carrying sealed orders. The family Christmas party had become the very scene my father had spent the last 14 months trying to prevent. The lead investigator introduced herself as Special Agent Marisol Vega and handed Thomas 2 documents. The first was a preservation order covering the resort, company offices, vehicles, and cloud accounts. The second was a warrant authorizing the seizure of devices connected to the fake vendor network. My father read the first page, then looked toward Henry as though the governor could erase it with a single gesture. You arranged this spectacle, he said. Henry answered immediately. A judge signed those orders after reviewing sworn evidence. I learned they had been approved 30 minutes ago. That distinction mattered. Henry had influence, but he wasn't the source of the case. My family could no longer dismiss the investigation as political theater without also dismissing bank records, access logs, forged documents, and their own messages. Agent Vega instructed everyone to place their company phones on a table. Megan complied first. Robert followed. Ryan kept one hand inside his jacket. I watched his eyes drift toward the side corridor leading to the service stairs. "Don't," I said. He looked at me with the same hatred he had worn when I first walked in, but now fear lived beneath it. "You think you won?" he asked. "You destroyed our name." "No," I replied. "I stopped you from hiding behind it." Agent Vega instructed him to remove his hand. Slowly, he pulled out a phone that wasn't listed on the company's inventory. Megan recognized it immediately. "That's the vendor phone," she said. Ryan rounded on her. "You should have been grateful. I protected your department every time Dad wanted to fire you." Thomas's head snapped toward him. "Be quiet." "Why?" Ryan shouted. "You said the payments were temporary. You said Northridge would cover everything before the auditors noticed." Those words hit the ballroom harder than any accusation I had made. Thomas crossed the room toward him and hissed, "You signed the transfers." "Because you told me to," Ryan shot back. Their carefully maintained hierarchy unraveled in less than a minute. Each man began sacrificing pieces of the other to save himself. Thomas claimed Ryan had invented the fake vendors. Ryan insisted Thomas controlled the accountant. Thomas accused him of stealing more than they had agreed to. Ryan revealed that the fake invoices had started years before Northridge. Guests quietly moved farther away, not because they feared violence, but because they wanted distance from the association. Agent Vega let them keep talking. A second investigator recorded every word. I stood beside the piano and felt no joy, only a fierce stillness. I had imagined this moment through countless sleepless nights. In my imagination, revenge had been loud and exhilarating. Reality was colder. Their punishment wasn't my anger. It was the loss of the story they had always told about themselves. Respectable men. Disciplined leaders. Victims of an ungrateful daughter. Then Thomas noticed the last item resting on the piano. A cream-colored envelope, its edges softened with age. It wasn't the publication notice. That lay open beside my laptop. The cream envelope held the letter my mother had written to me before she died. The one Megan had found inside an archived legal file. Thomas went pale. "Where did you get that?" "It was stored with the original trust amendment," I said. "You kept it from me." He reached for it. I picked it up first. My name was written across the front in my mother's handwriting. For 8 years, Thomas had told me she regretted leaving me company shares and had changed her mind before she died. The letter proved exactly the opposite. I unfolded it and read only the passage that belonged in that room. "Allison sees what others train themselves not to see. Do not punish her for telling the truth. One day, that courage may be the only thing standing between this family and ruin." The silence that followed felt different from every silence before it. This one didn't belong to Thomas. He couldn't command it away. I looked at him and asked, "Did you hate my career because you thought I would fail? Or because you were afraid I'd eventually look at you?" His lips parted. No defense came. Ryan stared at the carpet. In that moment, I finally understood the shape of my childhood. The comments about staying in the kitchen, the lectures about obedience, the financial threats, the opportunities they sabotaged. None of it had been random cruelty. Thomas had spent years teaching me to doubt my own judgment because a daughter who trusted what she saw was dangerous to a man whose life depended on concealment. "Your mother was emotional near the end," he finally said. It was the weakest lie he had ever told. I folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. She was accurate. Agent Vega examined the unregistered phone and asked Ryan for the passcode. He refused. She informed him that the device would be secured for forensic extraction. At that exact moment, it started ringing. The caller ID read, Victor Lane, Thomas's private accountant. Ryan instinctively reached for the phone. Agent Vega stopped him and read the preview message aloud. "Transfer failed. Account frozen." What did you tell them? Thomas closed his eyes. The remaining guests no longer needed my article to know the truth. But in 21 minutes, the rest of the state would know it too. With 12 minutes remaining before midnight, Thomas asked to speak with me alone. Agent Vega refused to let him leave the ballroom, so he lowered his voice and stood beside the darkened Christmas tree, as though posture alone could create privacy. I can still fix this, he said. I'll restore your shares, transfer the lake house to you, and issue a public statement praising your work. Just delay the article for 24 hours. He was offering me the symbols he believed I had always wanted: property, approval, public acceptance. 8 years earlier, I might have mistaken the offer for love. Now I heard the condition hidden beneath every word. And Megan? I asked. His eyes shifted. She resigns quietly. The employees who warned you? We'll handle them internally. And the stolen public funds? He exhaled impatiently. The money can be returned. I looked at him and realized he still believed consequences were simply a price to negotiate after getting caught. You're not asking for time to tell the truth, I said. You're asking for time to invent another lie. I stepped away. Ryan was sitting near the piano while an investigator copied the contents of his phone. Without the crowd orbiting him, he looked smaller. Then the ballroom screen changed again. Megan had opened a recovered group chat titled Christmas Cleanup. The messages had been sent that very morning. Thomas had written, "If Allison appears, remove her before Caldwell sees her." Ryan had replied, "I'll make her lose control in front of everyone." Another message instructed the resort's security team to disable the camera facing the main entrance. They had expected me. "You said I wasn't invited," I told Ryan. "You knew I was coming." Megan displayed the formal invitation she had sent on behalf of the compliance committee, along with the delivery receipt proving that Thomas's assistant had opened it. My brother hadn't slapped an unexpected intruder. He had tried to provoke a witness before she could speak to the governor. Agent Vega read the messages twice before looking at Ryan. "Based on these communications," she said, "your assault may also be investigated as possible witness intimidation." His face went blank. "Dad told me she was blackmailing us," he said. Thomas answered without looking at him. "You chose what you did." The betrayal in Ryan's expression almost made me laugh, but it was too familiar. My father had used him differently than he had used me. He rewarded Ryan's obedience until Ryan confused privilege with love. Now that obedience had become evidence, Thomas abandoned him. "He'll sacrifice you before he accepts responsibility," I said. "He already has." Ryan looked at me, perhaps expecting sympathy, perhaps hoping I would rescue him without forcing him to ask. I offered him neither. Understanding why someone became cruel does not require volunteering to bear the consequences of that cruelty. At 11:59, my editor called. I answered on speaker. "Legal has cleared everything," she said. "The evidence links are live. We publish on your signal." Thomas whispered my name. For the first time in my life, it sounded like a plea. Henry stood near the fireplace, silent now because the choice belonged to me. Megan held my mother's letter against her chest. The board members remained on the screen. Around us, the guests watched the clock tick toward midnight. I thought about every time I had apologized for noticing what other people wanted hidden. Then I said one word. Publish. At midnight, phones throughout the ballroom vibrated almost simultaneously. The headline appeared on the screen. The Christmas list. How a family contractor built a public empire on ghost vendors, forged records, and a stolen identity beneath it was my name. Not a protected byline. Not an alias. Allison Carter. Ryan read the first paragraph and covered his face. Thomas kept staring at the headline as messages flooded his phone. A lender suspending credit. A donor withdrawing support. A business partner demanding repayment. A television station requesting a statement. The state's public contract portal updated from pending review to disqualified. Henry finally spoke. The Northridge contract award has been permanently withdrawn. Carter Development is barred from bidding on new state contracts while the investigation continues. Thomas's knees seemed to weaken. No one stepped forward to steady him. For years, everyone in that room had rushed to protect his dignity. That night, dignity was no longer the emergency. The truth was, I closed my laptop and slipped my mother's letter back inside my coat. Thomas called after me as I crossed the ballroom. "If you walk out now, you're no longer my daughter." That threat had controlled me for years because I believed belonging was something he could give or take away. I turned back at the doorway. "You stopped treating me like your daughter long before tonight. The only difference is that I finally stopped calling your control love." Ryan stood there with tears running down one cheek, too ashamed to wipe them away. "Allison, wait. Tell them I didn't plan the whole thing. Then tell them the truth," I said. "All of it. Not to save yourself from Dad. Not to win me back. Tell it because the people you stole from deserve it." I didn't offer forgiveness. Forgiveness given under pressure is simply another form of obedience. Megan walked out beside me while Henry stayed behind to answer questions about the suspended contract. As the ballroom doors closed behind us, the last thing I heard was Agent Vega asking Thomas to sit down and stop touching his phone. I had imagined leaving with some triumphant speech. I didn't need one. My article was already speaking in every newsroom, every boardroom, and every government office that had once welcomed my father without question. Over the following weeks, the consequences became measurable. Federal and state prosecutors charged Thomas with procurement fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, and obstruction of justice. Ryan accepted a plea agreement, surrendered hidden accounts, and testified against his father. He lost his executive license, his home, and the circle of friends who had mistaken access for genuine affection. Thomas refused every plea offer, insisting that the family name would protect him. It didn't. He was convicted after a public trial and sentenced to 11 years in prison. The court restored my stolen shares and ordered repayment of the trust distributions. Carter Development avoided collapse only because the board removed both men, cooperated fully with investigators, and placed the company's legitimate operations under independent management. Megan became chief compliance officer. Hundreds of employees kept their jobs while the shell companies were dissolved, and the recovered funds were returned to public programs. I sold half of my restored shares to an employee ownership trust and used part of the settlement to establish a legal defense fund for whistleblowers threatened by powerful employers. I kept only one thing for myself: my mother's letter. A year later, on Christmas Eve, I read it again in my own apartment before submitting another investigation. There was no dramatic family reunion. Ryan sent several letters apologizing. I didn't respond until his actions began matching his words. Thomas wrote from prison and continued describing himself as the victim. I returned every one of his letters unopened. Some people assume revenge means finding pleasure in watching others lose everything. What I felt was quieter and far more lasting. They had built their power by deciding who was credible, who belonged, and whose pain could be ignored. I took that power away by creating a record they could never erase. So when people ask whether I regret walking into a Christmas party where I supposedly wasn't invited, my answer is simple. I was invited by the truth they had buried. And I stayed long enough to make sure it was finally heard. Family can survive disagreement. It can survive distance. It can survive disappointment. But can it survive without accountability? And when the people demanding your loyalty are using it to hide what they've done, is walking away really betrayal? Or is it the first honest choice you've ever made? Thank you for staying with us until the end of this emotional story. Everything in this video is fictional and created solely for entertainment and educational purposes. We hope it reminds you that you don't have to keep making room in your life for people who bring only confusion, manipulation, and pain. A peaceful heart is worth protecting, even if protecting it means letting go of the people whose names once felt impossible to leave behind.